people discount what kids are capable of. And for good reason, we need to protect kids, and there are a lot of things that kids should not be just left to their own devices to do, or they risk being seriously injured, or just stuff happening that is just no bueno. But at the same time, like, I've even heard stories of like kids doing some terrible things. I mean, there's true crime documentaries about some evil atrocities committed by kids, and it's just odd to see real life-changing crazy circumstances happening with people who have not even had a chance to like prepare for stuff like that. But there have been some heroic instances with kids. I know that there have been kids that have duped people who have abducted them, and there have been war heroes that were kids. There have been unbelievable acts, from kids. It just goes to prove that you can't judge anybody, no matter how young they are, how old they are, when it comes down to the life or death situations or their character.
Yeah.
A lot of that stuff is very unexpected when it happens, and I like there's some war heroes that I've learned about from World War II that lied about their age so that they could go fight.
Yeah.
And a lot of them were like, one of them was as young as 14 years old, 13 and 14-year-old little dudes rolling out to go fight Hitler, which is insane to think about. But then again, like, how many kids did you know growing up that if they could have got away with some shit like that, might have done?
Yes.
Yeah. So
a lot of little hellions that I'm
there's some crazy stories out there, and a place that you can definitely go if you want to hear about one of those is Mr. Ballen's channel.
True.
He has a video that we're about to watch called The Bravest Kid in America.
I have no clue.
I have no clue either, but it's always interesting.
Were you a brave kid? Like, you can be scared.
No,
and still be brave.
I was stupid enough to be brave and do things that would make me seem brave. But knowing what I know now and putting that into the same situation, I wouldn't have done it. A lot of times with a lot of things. A lot of bodily harm that could have been.
Yeah, I think I was a lot more like brave as a kid than now. Because I'm like, oh, that's so dangerous or whatever.
Right.
And as a kid,
I would just go straight in, all in on something. Now, if I'm doing something dangerous, I really want to prepare for that.
Right.
Yeah. So let's get into this one. I have no idea what to expect.
Here we go.
As you listen to today's absolutely epic story, remember the main character was a child when all of this happened. A child. But before we get into today's story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right channel, because that's all we do, and we upload 2 or 3 times every week. So if that's of interest to you, please continuously maneuver your vehicle right in front of the like button's car on the highway, and then turn on your blinker, but don't change lanes. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. All right, let's get into today's story. In 1937, the Japanese declared war on China and invaded their country. The United States, who was friends with China, initially did not intervene in fear of provoking Japan. But after the Japanese murdered hundreds of thousands of unarmed Chinese civilians and the Japanese attacked an American warship, the United States was forced to step in. American officials responded to the Japanese aggression by placing serious economic sanctions and trade embargoes on Japan, believing this would cripple their war efforts in China, causing them to have to retreat. However, the sanctions and embargoes did not have this effect. Instead, they just angered Japan and made them even more determined to hold their ground in China. Over the next few years, the United States and Japan attempted to negotiate some sort of settlement, but neither side would make any concessions, and so neither side would budge. A few years later, on the morning of Sunday, December 7th, 1941, the Japanese launched a surprise aerial attack on the American military base in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. After the 2-hour attack was done, over 2,400 Americans were killed, with another 1,000 wounded, and 300 airplanes and 20 ships were either destroyed or significantly crippled. The Japanese had hoped this attack would goad the United States into lifting the sanctions and embargoes they had placed on them from back in 1937, but instead, all the Japanese did was goad the United States into all-out war with them. One day after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, the United States officially declared war on Japan, thus entering World War II. On the day the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, Jack Lucas, like every other American in the country, was glued to his radio listening to the news. He was devastated and shocked at this carnage he was hearing about in Hawaii. And so by the time the President of the United States was declaring war on Japan, Jack had already made up his mind that he was going to join up and he was going to fight for his country. However, there was an issue. Jack wasn't old enough to join the military. You needed to be 17 years old, and Jack was only 14. But this was not going to stop Jack. So he created this fake document that said he was 17 years old, and he forged his mother's signature on it. And then, after bribing him, he got a notary to sign off on this document as well. And so Jack took his forged documentation, he gave it to the recruiter, and before long, Jack was accepted into the armed services and was on his way to Marine Corps boot camp. After completing initial training and becoming a Marine, the Marines found out Jack's paperwork was actually faked. But instead of kicking him out of the military, they said, Jack, you can stay in, but under one condition. You can't go overseas to combat. You have to stay in the United States. You can drive a truck and help out around here, but you can't deploy and go to war until you're of age. Jack was not happy about this, but initially he did as he was told, and he did just drive a truck around and support it as best as he could. But after about a year and a half, 2 years of this, Jack just couldn't do it anymore. That was not why he had forged this document to get into the military. He had done that so he could actually go fight in the war. And so finally, when he was just 16 years old, he abandoned his post and snuck onto the back car of a troop transport train that was going to another military base. And so when he arrived at this base, which was in California, he hopped off and then ran to the docks where there were these big warships. And he saw one of them, there was a whole bunch of troops loading onto it. And he figured, that's where I need to go. And so he snuck onto the ship and he hid down below. And then after the ship took off and was out to sea, he revealed himself. And he walked up to a Marine officer and he kind of played off the, oh, I must have got on the wrong ship, but now that I'm here, can I join your unit? And this officer, who had no idea how young Jack was, eventually said, okay, but prepare yourself because we're going to invade Iwo Jima. Now, Jack had never heard of Iwo Jima and did not know its significance. But frankly, Jack didn't really care. He was just glad that he was actually going to see combat. What Jack couldn't have known, and what the other Marines on the ship couldn't have known either, is that the battle for Iwo Jima would become one of the bloodiest and deadliest battles of the entire war. The Japanese that were on this island defending it were absolutely fearless and would not surrender despite being outnumbered, and they were heavily entrenched in these caves and tunnels built in all over the island, and they rarely left these caves and tunnels, which meant Jack and the other Marines, when they landed on this island, the only way they could fight the Japanese was by literally crawling down into these tunnels, which were usually booby-trapped, and fighting up close and personal with the enemy. Jack's ship arrived off the coast of Iwo Jima in February of 1945 when Jack was still 16 years old. On February 19th, the first wave of Marines climbed down the side of this big ship down onto these smaller amphibious landing crafts, and then one by one they began making their way towards Iwo Jima to begin the invasion. Jack was not part of this initial invasion. He would be going out on day 2 with the second wave of Marines. And so Jack and all the other second wave Marines just stood at the front of the ship and watched as these amphibious crafts made it up to the beach and then just got completely gunned down by Japanese machine gunners that were lining the beach. And so by by the second day, when Jack and the rest of the Marines are getting ready to launch their assault, there are literally thousands of dead Americans just lining the beach. But Jack and the other second wave Marines, they knew this was their job, this was their duty, and so they were undeterred. They climbed down the side of the ship, they boarded their amphibious landing craft, and began the journey towards the island. As they got closer, the Japanese machine gunners opened fire not only on Jack and the boat he was in, but all of the crews that were coming towards the beach. And so hundreds of Americans were just getting gunned down before they even reached the sand. Jack and his crew managed to get to the beach, and so as the gate dropped on their boat, and as Jack is running onto the beach, the men around him are just getting cut to pieces by these machine guns. Jack manages not to get shot, and he, along with 3 other Marines, run up the beach and they lay down in front of the sand dune that protected them from these machine gunners. Jack knew he couldn't stay there for very long because the Japanese were also firing artillery shells onto the beach, and so it would just be a matter of time before he was blown up. And so Jack and these other 3 Marines that had arrived at the same time, they began moving north, doing their best not to get shot or blown up, stopping behind rocks and trees and jumping behind sand dunes. And after a couple hours of doing this, the 4 of them reached the airfield at the northern end of the island. And when they get there, a machine gunner inside of a pillbox. A pillbox is like a small concrete fort that only has openings on 3 or 4 of its sides that are just big enough for a machine gun to poke through. A machine gunner inside one of these pillboxes notices Jack and the other 3 Marines, and they open fire on them. And somehow, Jack and these other 3 Marines managed to not get shot, and were able to maneuver and then fire through one of those openings and take out the machine gunner inside. And so now that this gunner is down, Jack and the others see the opportunity to run forward and take more ground of this airfield. And as they're running, other Japanese soldiers in the general vicinity, they see them, they start opening up on them from other pillboxes and other locations, and it forces Jack and these Marines to just jump into the nearest trench to avoid getting shot. And so they're jumping into a Japanese trench, which is a deep hole dug in the ground to protect yourself from getting shot. And as they jump in there, they're expecting to see Japanese soldiers coming towards them, but there weren't any soldiers. But they knew they couldn't stay there for very long because eventually Japanese soldiers would come through here and then they'd get killed. And so they quickly decided their best bet was to basically get out of this trench and run towards the pillbox where they knew they had taken out the machine gunner inside, so they could actually take that pillbox for themselves. And so their plan was they would run towards it and stop inside of each of the trenches along the way to protect themselves because they know there are other Japanese that know where they are. And then once they get to the pillbox, they can regroup and call in reinforcements. And so one of the men Jack was with said, "Okay, I'll go first." And so he climbs out of his trench as the Japanese are shooting at him, and he sprints about 10 or 15 feet until he gets to the next trench on the way to this pillbox. And so Jack is watching as this guy jumps into this trench, and as soon as he disappears out of view, this Marine is immediately turning around and scrambling to get back out of the trench, and he's trying to run back towards Jack and the other 2 Marines he was with. It would turn out this guy had jumped into another Japanese trench that was full of Japanese soldiers. He'd actually landed on top of an actual soldier. But these Japanese soldiers were so caught off guard by this, they didn't have time to react and shoot this Marine before the Marine was able to scramble out and get back to Jack and the others. And then for the next several minutes, Jack and these other 3 Marines opened fire on these Japanese soldiers in this trench like 10 or 15 feet away, and these Japanese soldiers, they too opened fire on Jack and the other 3. Jack was able to take out 2 of the Japanese soldiers before his gun jammed, and so he ducked down into the trench to work on his gun, and as he's down there, he notices there are 2 grenades on the ground right next to him. And so without any hesitation, he yells, "Grenade!" to the other Marines, and then he jumps on top of them, smothering the grenades with his body. One of the grenades was a dud, and so it didn't explode. The other was not a dud, and it went off. The way a grenade works is there is a small piece of explosive that is inside of metal housing that's usually spherical, and this metal housing is the thing you actually hold on to and throw when you throw a grenade. And so when this small explosive is triggered by pulling the pin and releasing the spoon, it detonates and it causes the metal housing itself to be ripped apart and sent flying. Basically, when a grenade goes off, it's like having hundreds of pieces of jagged metal shot off in every direction that are all traveling roughly at the speed of a bullet or faster. And so naturally, a grenade up close is incredibly lethal. In fact, the kill radius of a typical fragmentation grenade is about 5 meters. When the grenade under Jack that was not a dud exploded, it sent Jack flying into the air, and then when he came back down again, his comrades saw him and they could see he was clearly devastated from all the fragmentation that had been pumped into his body, and so they assumed he was dead. But even if they thought he was alive for some reason, there was nothing they could have done to have helped him, because they were actively being engaged by dozens of Japanese soldiers that were only about 10 or 15 feet away. And so eventually, these 3 other Marines that Jack had just saved were forced to leave Jack where he was and retreat back to the beach, and they would all live. The Japanese soldiers in the trench that they were fighting against would eventually come into Jack's trench, but most likely when they saw Jack laying there just completely ruined from this grenade, they assumed he was dead, and so they just kind of left him there. But Jack wasn't dead. He just couldn't speak, and he couldn't see anything, and he really couldn't move, although he could wiggle a few fingers on his left hand. And so for hours, as he lay there in agonizing pain, in and out of consciousness, he just wiggled the fingers on his left hand, hoping an American would see him and know he was still alive. And you gotta figure, this whole time, it is just constant chaos all around him. His chances of survival are incredibly slim. The idea that an American is gonna find him and be able to evacuate him is almost zero, and he must have known that. But by some miracle, eventually another American unit did find their way into Jack's trench, and they did notice him wiggling the fingers on his left hand. And so they were able to evacuate him from the trench down to the beach, and from there, under the cover of darkness, they were able to bring him out to a hospital boat offshore, and there he would begin the first of 26 major surgeries to remove the grenade shrapnel from his torso, his arm, and his face. Despite his grievous injuries, Jack would surprisingly make a full recovery. And 8 months after his injury, the President of the United States would award him the highest decoration for bravery, the Medal of Honor. He would be the youngest recipient of this award since the 1800s, and to this day, he is one of only a handful of miners to have won this award. Following his departure from the military, Jack would survive a near-death experience while skydiving when both of his parachutes, his main and his reserve, failed, and he just smashed into the ground, but somehow lived. He would also survive a very bad house fire, and he would survive an assassination attempt on his life by his ex-wife. And so naturally, he titled his memoir Indestructible. Jack would eventually die of natural causes on June 5th, 2008. He was 80 years old. So that's going to do it, guys. If you found the secret in today's episode, let us know in the comments section what it is and where you found it. So give us the timestamp. And if you're the first to do that, we'll pin you at the top of the comments section. If you got something out of today's episode and you haven't done this already, please continuously maneuver your vehicle in front of the like button's car on the highway and then turn on your blinker, but don't change lanes. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly 2 or 3 video uploads.
Holy shit.
This man done had a grenade blow up on his ass, parachutes not going off, and then his ex-wife was just going to try to kill him?
Why did she think she stood a chance?
Right, that's what I'm saying. Like,
if the Japanese on Iwo Jima couldn't take him out, then God tried. You know? Yeah.
And then a house fire.
That's unbelievable, man. What a life. But, like, also, what good luck, but shit luck at the same time. Why should you have to survive all that shit?
Well,
why should you have to go through it?
Sign up for the first bit of it.
And the parachute, and jumping out of the thing.
Well, when you go parachuting,
I'm not doing it.
There have been skydiving, parachuting. There have been too many videos that I've seen that the parachutes don't go off.
Yeah, it seems to be a risky endeavor. Yeah. I know there's people that do it all the time, but as far as I'm concerned, nah.
Yeah.
But World War II heroes, I've heard of a few. There's a few others that I've heard like that where they're underage. One of the main ones I've heard, it was the movie that I watched about is called like Hero, and the kid faked his identity or whatever to join the military early, went into the Navy, and they found out after he had been through this battle on the naval ship that he had lied on his stuff. So they sent him to military prison, and it was like he's a young boy in military prison, and it was like just a whole mess. And I'm like,
well, that's what I was thinking. Today, if you lied about your stuff, forged a signature, hopped on this boat in California
Yeah.
where you weren't supposed to be anyway,
You would be
they
wrecked.
wouldn't be like,
Yeah.
come on.
Well, I mean, that other
You're
dude
here anyway.
literally was decorated as a hero and stuff, and he got sent to prison as a kid, and that didn't turn out well for him.
That's so
Yeah.
sad.
I know.
So whenever I was in community college, they had a speaker come, and it was the history department put it all together. And it was this man, his name was Glenn Frazier. And whenever he was 16 years old, he lived in Mobile, Alabama, and he had his first heartbreak. And his girlfriend broke up with him, and he got so angry, and he drove his motorcycle through town, and I'm pretty sure, like, through a bar. Like, he was like, my life is wrecked, this is awful, so I'm going to sign up for the military and just get the fuck out of here, right? But he's 16. So, and I couldn't remember, like, did he get somebody to sign for him? So I looked it up, and he let his friends and family think that he had gone missing for 3 months, rather than risk his mother call the army and demand him be sent home. By the time his parents got his letter, Pearl Harbor had been attacked and the U.S. had entered the war. And within months of leaving, he had been engaged in jungle combat in the Philippines just days after his 17th birthday. 5 years on, long given up for the dead by the U.S. government, his family, and the girl he'd left behind, the war's end found Frazier a slave laborer in a Japanese prison camp. So he spoke about all the things that he endured.
Mhm.
And he was 16 when he first went.
Yeah.
And it was a tragic, tragic story.
Yeah, there's a lot of hell that was raised in that situation. Literally hell. And the people that were involved in that were usually very young. Very young. So, considering that, I feel blessed to have lived the life that I've lived. And while things have been outrageous and ridiculous the past few years, in comparison to the way that things have been in the past,
Right.
it's par for the course.
Right. We could definitely have it way rougher.
Yeah. The struggle is real, and that is a real thing to say. There's no getting away from it. But you see these crazy motherfuckers, they're just like, yes, the struggle. I'm just saying.
I know, sign me up. I want a piece
it
of
just
that.
goes to say how bored people were back then. There was literally nothing else to do.
That's true, but I feel like there was also this sense of like, I need to do something to help.
Propaganda works. But Mr. Ballen here, what a magnificent storyteller, a veteran in his way, one of the most elite special force operators on the planet, a Navy SEAL, total badass. Cool to hear him talk about World War II. It's a fascinating subject and a really fascinating character here. This guy sounds like a crazy son of a bitch.
Grenade.
Yeah. Hey, that's what you're supposed to do.
Is it?
Yes.
You're supposed to jump on top of it.
Oh, yeah. If you can
You're
protect
trying to
other people
jump
around
on.
you, yeah.
I feel like in my heart, that's like what I would instinctively want to do, but I feel like my body would be like, no.
Why do you
no.
think they tell everybody
No.
that you're supposed to do it?
Do you
Because
think that
somebody's
everybody...
supposed to, I mean, I'm sure there's been, because here's the
That
thing.
would be so
Here,
hard.
but you got to think of it this way. You're standing there with your people. You were on a roller derby team for a little while, and you know what it's like to have a team and your people, and you're in the fight with them.
Except for I'm not like gonna die.
but still, like.
No, I'm
if
saying
you
it would be
get-
stronger
well,
if you were.
If you get in a situation like where everybody is gonna die, or maybe just you.
Right.
Like, you're gonna die if
I
you
know,
don't
like,
anyway.
like I said, in my heart, I would want to, but I don't think my body would physically let me do it.
Well, I
But then
mean,
again, you're in the middle
you
like,
don't know.
of everything going on,
yeah,
and
you
your
don't know.
adrenaline.
But,
and
like, just in that situation, you're going to die,
right.
But he didn't. So, there you go.
And like they were like, it even like got in his chest and his arm and his face, and then they showed him getting,
Mhm.
and that he looked fine.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Sometimes, you know. But great video. Go subscribe to Mr. Ballen if you haven't. Check out his videos if you haven't. He's fantastic. And we will definitely be watching more of his stuff. If you enjoyed this reaction, you could subscribe to our channel. You could like this video. You could also go check out all the other videos that we've done.
Yeah.
We've done a bunch of them.
A bunch of Mr. Ballen and a bunch of other stuff too.
A bunch of other stuff.
And if you have any recommendations for videos for us to react to, you can leave it in the comments below or on our Discord.
And we go live. Yes, that's right. We stream every Monday and Thursday night, 6:30 Eastern Standard Time. We have a good time, and we would love for you to be a part of that. But thanks so much for watching this video.
Thanks.
I think that's going to do it.
Yep.
See y'all.
Guys.